only 25% of households relied on a social grant, and that has increased significantly to around 28-29% of 2020.
Grants have quickly become the main source of revenues for a majority of households in the country. Here to discuss this and more is my fellow colleague at the CRA, Gerbrandt van Heerden. Gerry, what do the latest social grants numbers tell us about where South Africans get their income from?
Yes, Bheki. So Status A has released their general household survey, which of course gives a brief overview of the country in terms of living standards. And one of the standout statistics is that a growing number of South Africans are relying on social grants as their main source of income. So what Status A found was that half of all South African households rely on a salary or a wage as their main source of income. And then second to that, 28% or nearly a third of South African households rely on a social grant as their main source of income. Now, the picture actually looks worse when you compare it to the previous year, because in 2019, only 25%, which is still a lot, but only 25% of households relied on a social grant, and that has increased significantly to around 28-29% of 2020. If you do a provincial breakdown, the story looks really worrisome because, for example, in rural provinces such as the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and the Free State, in those provinces, there are actually more social grant beneficiaries than there are people who are in employment. For example, in the Eastern Cape, 45% of households, or around 45% of households, have a social grant as their main source of income, compared to around 36% of households in that province that receive their main source of income from a salary or a wage. So overall, South Africa is seeing an expanding welfare state, and that's going to have a number of implications for the country going forward.
Enjoying this analysis? Click here to sign up for our 30-day free trial for more content from the CIA.
That is quite concerning there, Gerry. And if you recall, earlier this year, me and yourself, we've worked on a graph looking at social grants, compare that to the number of people employed. Now, over the past 10 years, employment numbers have largely been stagnant in the country, to the point where South Africa has actually not recovered its employment levels pre-pandemic. In fact, we are about 2.1 million people short that don't have jobs compared to the third quarter of 2019. Now, Gerry, what has gotten us to that point? What are the factors perhaps that has led to a lot of people relying on social grants and employment numbers not really recovering?
Well, I think there are two things to consider. Firstly, I think the ANC has given up creating jobs. And we can see that with them increasingly considering policies such as a basic income grant, even though our fiscus is under severe strain and we are operating in a low growth environment for a number of years now. Secondly, I think there is an ideological element to the ANC's approach to everything they do. And what I mean by that is that the ANC constantly recommits itself to the National Democratic Revolution, or NDR, and the ANC's alliance partners, COSATU and SACP, view the NDR as the foundation to a socialist and eventually a communist society. And committing itself to the NDR is the reason why the ANC implements interventionist policies and are considering even more interventionist policies, which firstly scares investment away, secondly hurts businesses and makes employers reluctant to employ more people. South Africa already suffers from burden from over-regulation, and the government is, for example, now considering the draft Companies Amendment Bill, which will hurt businesses even further and scare away investors. The National Minimum Wage Commission has recently called for a review of the minimum wage, which is one of the main reasons why labor is so expensive in this country, and that acts as a deterrent to employ more people. And of course, the strengthening of broad-based BEE policies. That is all policies and legislation the government is still pushing. And not only is that leading to more job losses, but it is pushing people to be, or it's forcing people to be more reliant on social grants and therefore the state.
Yeah, Gerrie, and that redistributive path also acts as a limit on reforms that needs to be implemented in the country. In other words, because of the ideological aspect of the ANC, they're simply unwilling to implement reforms in the country unless they are faced with massive levels of pressure, be it internally or externally from other countries around the world. And just to get back on the social grants risk there, Gerrie, with an increase in the number of people being reliant on social grants, the state needs to pay out these social grants. What are the implications of this as the fiscus runs dry?
For a developing country or a medium income country or a middle income country, we actually have an exceptionally high number of households that receive grants. That is not sustainable. The National Treasury themselves have said that it's not sustainable. Our taps are running dry, and yet the government is still moving towards redistributive policies such as the basic income grant. And that's just going to push us further or deeper into debt. And there's going to come a point where the government won't be able to increase the number of social grants, or they won't be able to increase the value of social grants. And with so many people already dependent on grants, that could even lead to wide-scale social unrest, even worse than what we saw earlier this year during the July Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal riot. Unless, what I'm trying to say is unless we implement reforms and embark on a path that helps the country to grow, that's going to be an inevitable situation for us.
That is quite concerning, Gerrie, and thank you for your analysis. So we now leave this to you, the viewer. What do you think are the implications of an increase in the number of people that rely on social grants when the fiscus in the country is running dry? Leave your comments below, and please click on the link below to your 30-day free trial. Until then, take care.